Welcome to Investors Coffee Shop. We're your host, Brian Harte.
Adam Elterhuni.
I have been working in the financial industry for over 18 years. I started in New York City and in 2010 expanded my business to Alexandria, Virginia.
For over 25 years, I've been gaming and investing in collectibles. I grew up in Georgia and in 2017 moved to Washington, D.C.
Investors Coffee Shop is for people who want to learn more about investing, make better decisions, create new streams of income.
In each episode, we will discuss investing in art, wine, collectibles, stocks, bonds, real estate, and anything else that may generate a profit.
Join us at Investors Coffee Shop. Welcome back to Investors Coffee Shop. Today we're live in New York, and I got to say, I've always wanted to say that. And today we'll be discussing investing in art with the owners of Gallery 71 here in New York City. And on this episode, we're excited to have Waneta back. For those that have been listening since the beginning, she was the original co-host for the first 5 episodes. Since then, she has been handling all of the marketing and hiding in the back room. Waneta, welcome back, and how have things been for you?
Thank you for having me back. Things has been exciting. I did more writing. I got featured in Bazinga as of recently, so that's pretty cool.
That is pretty good. Any other writings have been published?
No, not yet. Most of my work is currently on Hacker Noon, but I just started growing my profile on Bazinga. So, actually, surprisingly, I went to this event in New York, and they were talking about fixed income. I was like, oh my God, I have to do this. So I thought it wasn't going to work out, but it turned out to be the most read on that page. And I was like so happy.
That's amazing. Well, I'm glad to see you're doing well and things are doing well here in New York City. So moving on, before investing in art, asking the right questions can help you navigate this complex, lucrative market. Here are some important questions to consider. What are my investment goals? Understand your financial objective, whether it's long-term growth, diversification, or short-term gains. What type of art am I interested in? Determine the genre, the style, and period of art that appeals to you. This can guide your investment decisions. What is my budget for investing in art? You need to know how much you can afford to spend before you buy anything. How do I educate myself about art? Learn about art history, different art movements, notable artists, and market trends. Attend exhibitions, read books, and follow reputable art publications. What is the condition and provenance of an artwork? We're going to go over this in more detail. It's extremely important you know the background history of the art that you're buying. How do I authenticate the artwork? Determine the authenticity of the artwork by verifying certificates. Speak to someone at a gallery. They'll be able to help you and guide you on that way. What are the ongoing costs and risk associated with owning art? Consider expenses such as insurance, storage, maintenance, and potential for loss or damaged pieces. How do I assess the investment potential of a piece of art? Research recent sales of similar artworks. Analyze market trends and consider factors such as the artist's reputation, demand for the work, and cultural significance. What is the resale market like for this type of art? Investigate the liquidity of the market before you buy anything. Should I ask and seek professional advice? Consider consulting art advisors, appraisers, and financial advisors. And the tax implications, you need a full understanding when you're investing in art. You need to understand what regulations go into when you buy and when you sell. And how do I diversify my art portfolio? Exploring investing in different artists, styles, and mediums as we go over this in more detail later on. And what is my exit strategy is one of the most important things you need to know. How and when do you get rid of your pieces? By asking these questions and conducting thorough research, you can make informed decisions. When investing in art, it's essential to approach art investment with diligence, patience, and long-term perspective. And anything you buy has the opportunity of full loss. So just because you bought a piece of art does not guarantee that it will continue to rise in value. We have Alfred and his daughter Natalia Gonzalez from Gallery 71 on this episode, celebrating 30 years of art excellence established in 1994. Their gallery is located on Lexington Avenue in New York City. They showcase a unique blend of paintings, prints, photographs, and sculptures from talented artists from all over the world. Explore curated exhibitions such as recent James Stewart and Lynn Shaler highlights, inspired by iconic city landscapes, including New York, Paris, Venice. Their collection captures a distinct perspective of urban life. Alfred and Natalia, what was the driving force behind your decision to open an art gallery in the heart of New York City?
Hi, Brian, and thanks for having us on. I would say that it all started for me, at least, when I was in high school and I took on a picture framing job. And through high school, through college, I worked as a picture framer. And then much later, after college, I took on a job at an art gallery. I was with this company, which is at the time called Newmark Gallery, for about 10 years. And when we closed, unfortunately, as a direct result of the death of the two owners back in the days of AIDS, I found myself trying to figure out whether I'd go back to school or what I was going to do next. I walked by this space here where we are at 71st and Lexington, and it was for rent. And so I asked a few people if they'd like to invest with me, and one person came through, and a year later we opened the store in 1994. My interest in art has always been there as a child and through my young adulthood and as an adult now. At the end of the day, anyone who opens an art gallery is because they love art. People have asked me about my opening my gallery, and I tell them, well, it's something that I don't think I'll ever retire from. What they've always told me is actually you have it figured out, because when people open art galleries, sometimes they actually retire into them. And what I mean by that is there have been people who have been very successful in life and they don't want to do it anymore, whether it's the stock market or banking or anything like that. And then they consider opening a gallery. As they ask me about it, I say, well, don't do it unless you've actually worked in one. Financial disaster. Need a backbone for opening any business, so it's best.
I would agree with that. Anything you do, you need some form of experience. And tell us what you think the future of the gallery here is in New York.
I think the future of our gallery is really what's always been the focus. At the end of the day, artists need to get their art out there. Art is to be enjoyed. It's to be emotional and moving, and yes, of course, as well as an investment. And so for our goal for the gallery is something in between, of course, always keeping food on the plates of our artists and ourselves, but more importantly, getting them their flowers now while they're still with us. And that we wait almost like vultures for artists to pass to then see their value. And so I would say that that's always been our goal, and it will continue to be our future goal, and how technology changes and influences that is exciting.
And there are several types of art galleries where you can buy art. Please explain the difference between commercial galleries, contemporary art galleries, fine art galleries, and artist-run spaces.
We are a commercial gallery. We get art from artists, and we sell that forward to people who are interested in buying art. That's pretty much the nuts and bolts of what that is. Contemporary art galleries is what we are also, because we're selling work that is contemporary, it's made of the day, and there are many galleries that are like that. Don't find that, for instance, contemporary art gallery is in that category of a commercial gallery. It's something totally separate. Fine art galleries is what we are. And what would actually describe what a fine art gallery is an art gallery that will sell not posters or things that are knocked off through G-clays and not numbered. Fine art really has to do with numbering a piece, the artist's signature, and really, for the most part, being made by hand, as opposed to run off from a offset lithograph machine or anything like that. Artist-run spaces are, for the most part, cooperative, where they will each share in the rent, and they will have exhibits of either one or two of the artists or all of them at the time. I found that the ones that I've been to are a lot of fun, because this group of people who are artists all get along whether or not they do the same type of work. Anytime we have a show here, it's put out your best and clean up the space and out the wine, and it's the same for them, but it's just a group of people that are just having a good time for the most part and enjoying their friends coming and family, but of course the sales are important as well.
Galleries have evolved. What do you do to stay relevant in a fast-changing market?
It's no secret, right? COVID caused a lot of our businesses to pivot very quickly, whether you wanted to or not. That being said, I think we learned the lesson, and I can say coming into the gallery more recently, within the last 2 years, I learned a lot from my father about not being too quick to pivot. Staying relevant, you have to just recognize what's already working for you. For us here, it's referrals. We have a lot of people who bring their friends. Trying to pivot off of that, it became sending more personalized emails. So that's a part of staying relevant. A part of that also was just recognizing what our brand is and then extending that into the verse, right? So making sure that our Facebook, our Instagram, anything that we're really putting out there is what you're going to experience when you do come in the shop. Because I can't emphasize this enough, as wonderful as the virtual world has become, there's really nothing to compare the wonderful experience of seeing works in person, really breathing them in. That's also part of staying relevant. We always think, okay, how are we going to get people in here? So whether it's the Artist Talk series we started last year, or just having more shows in general, giving people an occasion to dress up and come out. These are the kinds of ways we decided not necessarily to fully pivot, but to put more emphasis on.
And galleries play a pivotal role in buying art. What would you recommend a customer to ask and do before making any purchases or visiting a gallery for the first time?
I think this is sort of like two fun parts, right? It makes me think of a creative, right? You get to have like the sort of let loose experience, experiment half, and then you have like the highly critical editing, right? And so the visiting half, go nuts. If you see a show that sounds interesting, show up for it. If you're just sort of dabbling on Google or one of these websites like ArtNet, just explore. That is my best advice. And then you'll start to see sort of if you see yourself in this curator's mind. Because galleries like us, it's very rare that you'll find someone selling something just because. Galleries usually have an essence, they have an idea. Here especially, we care just as much about the artists as we do about their art and their quality. And so that's something you'll find here. And if that's a level of warmth and interest you'd like, that's what I would look out for. Versus you have amazing galleries like Gagosian, right? And you'll see just incredible installations that they might not fit in your living room, but they're totally worth seeing and experiencing in person. And they're also free. But when you go to purchase, right, this is our discerning mind. This is the editor and this is the long-term vision. I think something to consider is that there's usually 3 different kinds of people buying art. You have the aesthete, the someone who comes in and they're just in love. They think it's beautiful. And they can't sometimes even describe what is attracting them to the piece, but they just know that they want to look at it more than just when they're spending that time. You'll have an investor. Someone who is just looking to make sure that no matter what, not only are they going to get a return on their money, but that it's going to continue to grow and grow. And this is someone who might show up at Sotheby's, right, at an auction house, and they're going to purchase the Picasso, they're going to purchase the Warhol, and they know, even if it's just sitting sadly and alone in their basement, that it's going to accrue money over time. And then you have someone in between. It's usually a collector. This is someone who's a balance. They're in love. They usually find interest in a particular artist, if not directly just their work. And they want to encourage the market. And by that I mean is that they're going to start collecting that artist's work. And that will bring life and longevity to that collection and for that artist, because that means people are caring. Ideally, right, this is sort of the investor's hope that the person you're taking a chance on over time is going to blow up and you were there in the beginning of it. I say all of these things because you have to decide what kind of purchaser you are before you decide what questions you're going to ask when you show up to purchase, because you're going to care more about, for example, the history of the specific piece. If you show up to Christie's to buy a Picasso, right, you want to know, have they worked on it, over time? Is this something that may have taken an injury? What does the provenance look like, which I know we'll get to further ahead. Versus if you're just sort of in love with something, it may be that one-off buy. And the investment there is really the fact that you love the piece. And the questions to ask might have more to do with the artist and their life, their inspirations, and sort of these free-flowing, non-numerical answers.
And incidentally, customers who have come in and they want to know about, I sell prints, limited edition prints is better stated, as well as unique pieces. There's a big difference between the two in terms of the person who's thinking of purchasing it. If you come into my store and you see a painting that you like, that's a one of a kind. I really do need to sell to survive. I never push people to buy a piece. Inform them and let them make their own decisions. But one thing I do see and say to them when I see that they're very interested in a piece and they're going to walk away from it is gently say that, aware that this is a one-of-a-kind piece, and I'd be happy to hold it for a day or two for you. You come back, if it's not here, that's it. And my experience is when you fall in love with a piece for the first time, you tend not to see that artist the same way when you come in and see other pieces. You got stuck on that first one, and you probably should have bought it. What determines whether or not you should have bought that piece? And that is look at your pocket. If you think that that piece has a value to it and it's at a price range that not only you can afford, but that you think is reasonable for what you're going to spend, then buy it. Don't think about it because you may regret it later. The other would be the limited edition pieces. When you're buying those, usually several different galleries do sell that same artist. Generally, they're not near each other. It might be one in another country or in another city or state. Do your research and make sure that what you're paying for that piece is priced the same in those galleries. And if it's not, just buy from the gallery that's selling it at the price that's agreeable to you.
That's good advice. How do galleries decide which artists they're going to showcase in the first place?
There are different ways that all of the gallerists decide. In my case, I have to like it because if I don't like the work, then it makes it so much harder to sell. The other thing would be the price point. I'm in a location where there are very wealthy people here, and there are people who are not as wealthy, but they can afford to buy art. So I have to think about what I'm going to have on my walls that will be at a level that most people will be able to afford walking by the store. For instance, $1 million piece in my gallery is not going to sell, at least not yet. We'll work our way there. And so what I've had in a lot of cases are people who can't afford that $1 million piece, so that maybe they'll buy 3 or 4 pieces from me. And some of my most satisfactory sales are when people come in and they can't quite afford something, but they work their way to it and they end up buying it. It's so much satisfaction that they're making that stretch. They got a piece that they love, and I was a part of facilitating that to them.
And if an artist wanted to have their art in your gallery, what would you recommend for them to do? And why do artists sign contracts to sell their work exclusively with just one gallery?
An artist wants to have their work here. I obviously have to look at a large scope of their work to see where they came from, where they're on, possibly where they're going. Again, it's just a matter of my liking not only the work, but also liking the artist, their personality. These interactions, because these are relationships that we're building, so these interactions have to be beyond just the dollar. As to why an artist would sign a contract with a gallery, that's an easy one, because the gallery is going to sell your work and be successful at it. No artist should sign an agreement with a gallery that doesn't have a track record of doing well for their artist. Because if having you sign a contract with me, that means that you'll be exclusive with me, at least within New York and possibly on the planet, which means that I should be able to guarantee that I'll sell everything that you give me. Case in point, I did do that with one of my artists who had a part-time job. I was selling her work so well. I was outpacing her in creating, and I said, why don't you quit your job? She says, well, she felt she needed that job security. My contract with her was verbal, and it was, you paint, and I'll buy everything you do. That's a commitment, and an artist should be happy to sign a contract that way. That's a sweet deal. She said, well, what if I get painter's block? And I'll advance you some money, and we'll make it up along the way. Old-fashioned way, right?
Oh, that's amazing. And I'm sure she appreciates that, and you're creating that loyalty too. Now, framing is often as essential as the art piece itself. Please explain why the frame can significantly impact the value of your art and why it's so important.
I'm not so sure about the value of it as opposed to the aesthetics of it. A beautiful frame will really make a painting shine more. There have been artists that I've worked with who say, well, I'll just put a very simple frame on it. My art can do it all. Well, that's not exactly true. Because when you put a frame on a piece, you're putting a personality on it. And whether or not it's the customer you're working on with putting a frame on it, because I have paintings here actually hanging on my wall. None of them are framed because they can hang just the way they are. Not all paintings are like that. And the fact is that these are finished quite well on the sides. You're not seeing paint dripping on the sides of it. Frames that I choose, I try to make them have a personality for what the pieces are. The problem there is not knowing where they're going after here. And that's yet something different. So someone will come in, and of course, the process of framing a piece is, well, what do you have in your home? I want to know more about them. And oftentimes I'd offer to go over so that we can get a frame that later on they're going to say, that didn't really work. I'm sorry we chose that because it's money. It dresses it up. There are times that it might overdress it. And it can be a pretty gaudy frame. But interesting enough, there are times that an over-the-top frame is just what that painting needed. And it's all individual. By putting a frame that is so decorative on something that's so simple. That's just one example among the many.
Are there certain types of frames people should avoid using when they purchase a piece of art?
Cheap frames. So, for instance, you buy a painting that might have cost you $4,000 or $5,000. Don't put a $300. Spend the money, because at the end of the day, you just amortize that. How long do you have that painting for? You'll have it for 15, 20, 30, maybe your whole life. So what you spent on that frame at the time is insignificant for the amount of time that you're going to enjoy it. The cheaper the frame you buy, the more apt it is to fall apart or have worms in it. And incidentally, that's a funny thing, because there are frames that are created today which you order with wormholes, which is just to recreate what was happening before, that these woods were not very good. And worms would eat their way through it. And today we're making these frames, gold leaf ones with wormholes. They were charging a fortune for them to create it.
When framing an item, the glass is extremely important. I get a lot of my art framed professionally, and there's several different types of glass. Why does the glass matter, and what is the average cost?
There are a lot of types of glass, probably like 15 to 20. I use about 4 or 5 basic ones. I try to stay away from regular glass, letting it, and the regular glass has a green tint onto anything you put it on. And you'll see that. If you look at the side of glass, you'll see that it's green. That's going to be on your piece. You won't see it immediately, but you will notice if it's right next to another piece. But it does nothing to protect the piece against light damage. So people tell me, well, it's not going to be near a window. I said, well, is there light coming in through the window? Well, yeah, but light bounces all over the place. So the first layer of protection will be your basic UV glass, which protects the piece up to 99.5% from UV rays. And then you have UV plexiglass, which is a step above that. It's lighter. People say, oh, it's going to be lighter on the wall. It doesn't matter. It's hanging on the wall, how heavy or how light it is. But it will protect the piece if it falls off the wall. It's not going to shatter. And then what I sell the best here is museum glass, which protects it to 99.7% from UV light, but then gives you reflection control where that piece will, sometimes you'll look at it, you can't even see that there's a piece of glass on it, depending on the angle, depending on where light is. And that's what I recommend. And the plastic version of that, the acrylic version, is Optium, which is what the museums use because it doesn't break, but that is a lot of cases prohibitively expensive. So you asked about price. So I can only give you price by one size to compare the three. For instance, regular glass here, I don't even charge for it. It's so cheap. Then we move to, we use a size of 16 by 20, let's say. UV glass is $75 here. Museum glass is $150. The UV plexi is going to probably be right around $125. And then when we move to Optium, we're going to probably be up in the range of $400 or $500.
The glass itself actually could cost more than the frame wooding.
Yes, actually, it can, and it has.
Because I usually get museum quality glass. I really didn't know the differences until you just explained it in great detail like that. So I appreciate that.
There's a glass I would tell everybody never to use. It's called non-glare glass. Sorry to whoever the sellers are out there, but this glass was created years ago, like in, I don't even know, the 60s. And it's a frosted glass. We've seen it on windows. We see it in showers and things of the sort. What happens with that glass is most effective when it's right on a piece. You don't want to put glass right onto an original piece of work. So you have a mat board, right, to separate it. But with that mat board, if you use fillets, the further away that piece of glass gets away from the artwork, the fuzzier it gets. Don't ever buy that.
And going on the mats, how does this help the art stand out? When do you not use matting?
Don't use matting if you have a painting, you're not going to use a mat on that. Either use a liner, which is linen, or it's gold leaf. And when you're matting a piece of work, in most cases, you will have a mat, whether you see it on the face or behind the piece, because it is acid-free, at least those of us who use acid-free mats, because there are mats that are not. The difference between those is that a mat that's not acid-free is made from tree pulp, and the acid-free ones are made from 100% cotton. Treated at pH levels at a level where it's not going to damage. Either way, you're either going to see the mat or you're not going to see it, but there's always going to be a mat in there.
And one of the last questions I have about framing, what would a consumer expect to pay on average? I know there's a lot of variables from the type of glass to the size of the artwork, but if you're going to have your piece of art you just bought framed, or you don't like the frame that it's in, you're going to have it reframed, what would be a guess range they could expect to spend?
Again, size is important, so I usually go by 16 by 20 because that's 6 feet, actually 7 feet of frame. Start with a metal frame. If you go to 2nd Avenue and 1st Avenue, you're probably going to pay about $80 for a metal frame, where here you're going to pay about $225. What's the difference? I don't butcher your work of art, that's one thing, and I use only museum quality materials. If you're using a hardwood frame, which would then be maple, cherry, walnut, you're probably going to expect to pay somewhere around $400. Use a gold leaf frame, whether it's white gold or yellow gold, you'll probably be in the range of $600 to $700. And then, of course, depending on the type of glass you're using, that's going to add more.
Now, there are so many different medias of art to buy. So if you're new to buying art, I would actually like to go over a few and explain what they are and how the price can be affected of different styles of art. We'll start with the first one, mixed media. What is mixed media art?
Mixed media, in essence, is just a work of art that you've introduced 2 or 3 different materials to make it. A photograph, for instance, someone will use pastel or use watercolor to paint on it, so that's mixed media. There are people who do collages, and then they'll paint on top of that. Mixed media, there are artists who will have envelopes, beautiful envelopes that have been written on in the 1800s, 1700s, and they'll draw on that. That's mixed media. In essence, mixed media, an oil painting that's been made, but someone has inserted either a magazine clipping in there or any other substance that wasn't just the one that was being used to create it.
And lithographs, etchings, and digital printings.
I would separate lithographs and etchings immediately from digital. Lithographs in the past were made from lithographic stones, which were about 3 inches thick. And if you did a lithograph that had 4 or 5 different colors, then you would have to lug these big stones from place to place as you create, and you take it to the printer. The beauty of lithographic stones is that you can grind them down and reuse them after you've printed an edition. Someone got the bright idea, I don't know who it is, to create. The reason that was so popular is because you can't get that texture from lithographic stones from anywhere else. Somebody figured out how to do it on aluminum. And the aluminum was very thin, easy to transport, and it's really taken over that. But lithographs are created by the artist by drawing specifically on the stone. Some people still use stone, or on the plates, hand drawn, and it's with a grease pencil, and that gets inked, and you run it through the press. However many times you have another stone or plate to run with a different color. Etchings, I believe, is a little more complex, or maybe a lot more. In etchings, you start in most cases with copper plate, and that copper plate, you have a coating on it, which is kind of a wax coating. To get your image, you draw through, you don't have to press hard, you draw through the wax coating with a needle, an etching needle. Some people will use a sewing needle. And once you make that drawing through that and you have it complete, you dip that plate in a bath of acid. The acid doesn't affect the areas where that wax is, but it goes into those lines that are going through the wax and exposing the plate to make ink. My artist here, Lynn Shaler, for instance, is a master etcher. Outside of her etchings, she also applies aquatint, which is familiar to everybody. That would be the color component. And that's pretty complex to explain, but in essence, you have to mask out the areas of the plate that you don't want a specific color and expose the ones that you do. You drop resin onto the plate in that area that you want to have that color, and then you heat the resin with those quartz crystals onto the plate so that they just tacky and they stick to it. Dip that plate in acid, and what it does is it eats around it and creates a texture in that one specific area. Ink that, print it. You have another plate that will carry another color. So most etchings by this specific artist are 4-plate etchings.
Considering value, which is more valuable? The lithographs, the etchings, or the digital printings? What do you desire more?
That is a Great question. I didn't even talk about the digital prints. Digital prints go in so many different directions. And one of them would be that a digital print can be a photograph that was taken of a painting. Not what I would consider original, but it's done all the time. It could also be, which is what I do with my own photography, a digital print from a negative that has been scanned.
I was just about to ask if you do that with your own photography.
Yes, as I'm avoiding the darkroom, yes, it's the easier way out. Let me start there because in terms of value, photography, you have your silver prints, which is common. Those, if I print it the same size, either digitally and with a silver print in the darkroom, the silver print will be more valuable. At some point, I'm going to get to that. And then in terms of lithographs and etchings, whether or not, or so many other different print types, because we have mesotints too, which is something we have. It really depends if you're one artist and you have different media that you work in, you determine which is more expensive as the artist. The art doesn't. And then you determine as the artist, if you have a huge name out there, what the price of that piece is going to be. So if we take a Picasso etching, for instance, the least expensive I've seen out there is yes, you can buy a Picasso for $1,800.
Get his drawings. He used to sit in Paris drawing all day long.
I wonder if they're his.
Yeah, there's... But yeah, the value depicts on mainly, obviously a Picasso painting is not it's walking around Paris. So there's a big difference in itself.
I've answered the question, but...
That was good. I mean, it's interesting because I own 2 Salvador Dalis. And I've used it many times in our previous podcast. The one I have is a lithograph, but Dali decided to make lithographs, and that became his bread and butter at the end of his life instead of painting. And then, so to me, I have always liked the story with the stones and the fact the artist was choosing colors, and you can see the colors lay on top of each other in the lithographs. But my question, I guess, going into this now, I notice most lithographs and etchings hand signed by pencils. So if you see one that's signed by pen or marker, would that be a dead giveaway that this isn't real?
It would have to be something that the artist has always done in pencil and you've never seen it done any other way. That's questionable. If that's what.
Yeah, and I know that's kind of off topic from what we were going here, but it hit me when we were talking about lithographs and etchings. And then I noticed yours here too also were all signed in pencil. So that I figured I should bring that up as well for listeners who are looking to buy something. I tend to stay away from lithographs or etchings when I'm buying something if it wasn't signed in pencil. To me, that just makes me feel better, and it gives some more credibility.
I would say don't give up on it. I mean, if it's an image you really like, just because it's signed in pen, don't pass it by.
Part of the conversation, though, too, is, right, when is this person in existence? I think it matters more, right? If you see it or a supposed Picasso and it's signed in like a loose marker, you're like, okay, he did not sign that in marker. Yeah. But, if you're going to find someone contemporary, a young person out now, or even, example, my father signs in marker. So you will find variations, but of course, context clues are everything.
Yeah, like if you can find in a photograph somewhere, just image, I'm assuming, in work.
That's real important that if you see something, Brian, that, for instance, you're not comfortable with, but you really like the piece, then you should verify, for instance, that artist has signed in pen or marker. You go on a cruise ship, they're very notorious for selling Peter Max's work. And he signs a lot of his pieces with marker. But that's what he does. So you'll know that you're getting something that's authentic. Outside of that, if it's, something that you've seen time and time again, it's kind of, oh, that's interesting. With a pen the first time I'm seeing it, yeah, one should question that.
I know there's an artist who's known for always videotaping himself working. I can't think of him off the top of my head.
Contemporary, he's right now?
Yeah.
Juan Rodriguez?
Yeah.
I got to meet him. I got a nice picture with him. Fellow Boricua, by the way.
So let's go into silkscreen and Geechlee, if I say that correctly. Giclée prints.
So silk screens are, again, an original form of artwork where the artist will mask out different areas on the screen. You have a piece of paper on a table. Stating this very simply, you put the screen on the paper, you bring it down as the screen is mounted onto a frame, and you put ink on it, and you take a squeegee, and as you push the squeegee and the ink from one side to the other, what ends up happening, it goes through the screen in that specific area that was not masked out. And so with silk screens, you generally have a bunch of different colors. I have noticed, though, to your question about value, that some silk screens are not really as much as other types of prints. However, the artist that's creating it, then there's also like Patrick Nagel. I mean, big silkscreen artist back in the 1980s, who did very well. And I don't know where he is today, but the value of his work has, so far as I've seen, maintained. G-clay prints are, in essence, archival digital prints. That's more of a common term used today. I'm not so sure that term G-clay prints is used much anymore. But in essence, they're pretty much the same. That you use archival paper and you use archival inks, whether it's photography or it's a print that you've created on the computer, and then you have it printed. So those, in essence, those are G-clay prints.
Now going into graphite versus charcoal drawings.
They're two total extremes, and they don't even look the same, actually. Graphite is, in essence, just pencil. Lead. So the artist will be working. It's a pretty messy process because I've never seen a work of art that's done with either graphite or charcoal that just hasn't been a mess if you have a border, because you're working with heavy, in terms of charcoal, just breaks apart as you draw on the piece of paper, and it's all over your hand. So you still have to handle that paper if you're turning it around and moving it from one place to the other. Same thing with graphite, but with graphite, you can get a lot more specific in drawing, let's say, an eyelash or something. Although I have seen some incredible charcoals where they sharpen that to very, very, very fine point, but it'll never be like graphite. And charcoals tend to be a lot darker, just because the nature of them is basically wood. Graphite is lead.
And acrylic and oil paintings.
Your question again about value. I've noticed that most oil paintings, I don't want to make a blanket statement here, but in my experiences, tend to have more value than acrylics. Again, we go back to who the artist is and their name, because that may not hold true at all. A lot of artists will start using acrylic because it doesn't smell like oil does, and it dries so much faster. I find when I painted in school, I went to Pratt Institute, really enjoyed oil because of the smell and the way it kind of smushed around on the canvas. Colors tend to be more vibrant on acrylics than oil. However, artists who sometimes I'll look at a painting and it's hard to tell until you get really close to it.
And sculptures?
Sculptures, wow. So many different types, whether you're working on stone or alabaster, metal or wood. And it's quite a talent for an artist to take marble and chisel that thing down and make something of it, polish it, or you don't, depending on what it is that you want. Sculptures, and then you deal with artists who are working in metal, and they have to go to a foundry. That's very expensive. Very expensive.
What is that exactly?
Foundry is where they will make a mold for your sculpture and pour it in, and they'll make it. You'll create a mold of your own. Kind of a resin that you'll carve into, and then you take it to the foundry and they'll bronze into it or whatever metal that you're using. And sometimes it just doesn't end there with that. The artist will go into it and start to hammer it or whatever it is, or put a patina on it. Sculptures are just endless and really beautiful art when you dimensional. They're not two-dimensional anymore. Other dimension here. They do carry something very special because they're so tangible.
Sculptures tend to rise in value much, or because they're so expensive in the first place, they just kind of stay flat?
Depends on the artist. On Henri Moore, sculptures are amazing, and there are installations all over the world, outdoor installations. It really depends on who
All right, and going into the last one, I'm going to ask about this, and this one's obviously near and dear to your heart, photography. How do you feel about photography and art?
Photography, yes, near and dear to my heart. I've been a photographer since I was 16. Photography took an incredible turn in, I would say, the late 70s, where you can afford to buy, maybe name everybody would know, an Ansel Adams photograph, probably in the hundreds. And that same photograph today, $30,000. There are some people who feel that, oh, okay, oh, so you have the negative, so you can print up 300 of them if you want. Well, yeah, you can. But your name as an artist will be mud the next day. So in photography, I feel it's important to position the pieces at something that you're comfortable with as the photographer, as the artist. I've been to so many photo fairs, and in there are editions of 5 pieces, and they're selling for $20,000, $30,000, so maybe for $300 or $400. I find that to be limiting, because once you're done with that edition of 5, then you're done with that image, and you shouldn't be printing it again, although nice.
So that's like a loophole.
I don't know that it's a loophole, but I wouldn't call it that, because some of the most famous photographers have printed their work, contact prints, for instance, are prints that are made directly from the negative right onto a piece of paper. You just expose that light. Enlargements is when you put that negative in an enlarger and you enlarge it. So one of my favorite photographers, Bernice Abbott, for instance, I was at a fair once and wanted to buy a piece that I regret this, fell in love with, and it was about $7,500. It's one of her most famous pieces, I think, called City View. It's looking down at buildings in New York City at nighttime. So when I asked the gallery director, well, how many in this edition? She says, well, 150 pieces. Oh, okay. Is it in different sizes? She goes, yes, it's in 4 different sizes. So as I'm asking questions, I'm getting more and more turned off because of the volume of pieces that one. Then she says, oh, and then there are the vintage ones. And I said, well, tell me about those. These are the ones that were created by the artist herself. And we really don't know how many there are. And so in thinking about all of that, I just felt, later on, I felt really stupid, and I'll tell you why. At the moment, I thought it was just like I asked the right questions, and I just decided I didn't want to buy it. It was going to be a great price, $7,500, and they were going to give me 20% off of that. What is it? I think $6 doing quick math. Well, it was 20 by 24 inches was the size of the image. Today, that image that I was going to spend $6,000 on is probably worth about $20. It's one of my great regrets, because now it's a piece that I won't say it's unattainable, but I really have to stretch to buy that. So at the time, I really thought about it that way. There was another instance where I went to a gallery at one of the photo fairs at the Armory here. And when I asked about this artist, I think he's a Russian artist, I said, well, it's $600, and how many in edition? She goes, oh, unlimited. He doesn't limit them. He's just, how many have you sold? Probably about 200 or 300 by now. I didn't buy that. Again, another great regret of mine, because $600 was attainable. And it's an image that I still have in my mind that I still love, and I haven't seen the gallery again that sells the work. I don't remember the name of the photographer. So the point is, when you see it, you like it, and it's affordable.
There are different types of art styles. I would like to go over a few so people know what they mean and what they're looking for their next piece. Can you give me a few examples of each artist?
Hey, Waneta. Yeah, so what I'm going to kind of do is sort of the background to that. And that way you listeners will have the tools to make those decisions, just understanding a little bit more about how this works. So in our history, we talk about periods, movements, and style. I would like you to think about it like this.
What periods? Any periods?
Yeah, right? So period usually is going off of time. Unless you're talking about ancient works, right? Then we're really talking about region.
Oh, so time, space, continuum and stuff, or no?
Okay, I like that you said continuum, because when we talk about movements, you'll see how they resurface. But periods are time for the most part, before, right, when we can't really know exactly the time. We have just this general ideas of ancient art.
Resurface?
Yes.
So like say you had a art piece back in like 1800s and it pops up back in 1929 or something, that kind of resurface, or?
No, what I mean by resurface is more specifically in ideal or philosophy or in style. So one example is, for example, we're talking about, let's say, the realistic period. And this is a time where we're seeing people wanting to demonstrate their reality or reality as it is more specifically. And so this is a time that spanned from 1850 to 1900. And then you see the movement resurface in 1930 to 1940.
Oh, that kind of resurface.
Yes. And when we talk about realism, right, the people we tend to think about, this is like really when America started to take the reins more from Europe in the art world. We're seeing people like Hopper, Rockwell, right, showing up, and they're showing almost like this idyllic view of Americanism. We might say this is where Americana is really beefing up. And so during this time, you're also having someone great like Dorothea Lange, who is literally capturing images of the suffering within America during the Great Depression. So within realism, you're seeing this influence, and then it resurfaces again later through the Great Depression, World War I, World War II, insert here.
Got you. It's kind of playing like an influence role in each era.
Yes. And here I would also like to take a caveat and let people know, right, a lot of these periods, a lot of these movements, with the exception of some, are really discussed later. This is something we do in retrospective. Unless you're, let's say, like a Dada artist, right? You're talking about a house that had its own manifesto, right? They had their own philosophy moving forward. But for the most part, a lot of these movements are contemplation of art historians later. And I mean, even in contemporary, you're having a lot of discussions and a lot of disagreements with where things fall. That maybe in 50 years will be settled in their classification. So moving forward from realism, you're going to see, right, the next movement to come out is going to be Impressionism. And this is a part of the modernist period. And something that's cool is that Impressionism is the artist deciding, I want to capture this moment. I want to capture the emotionality of it in the moment, right?
Oh, so that's like me taking a photo of my food every single day.
Yes and no.
No?
It depends on the purpose for it. And I guess this is where it gets a little hairy when you talk about humanities, right? So for Impressionism, the first artists that tend to come to mind, Degas, Cassatt, right? These are people who were trying to show you what they were experiencing through their daily lives. And this is a direct response to realism because they wanted to shift the lens from maybe necessarily like an idyllic view or just the stark view for people to make their judgment. Now we're seeing more of an influence of the artist showing you what they are experiencing, what they want you to see. But from Impressionism, then you build into post-Impressionism. And this is Seurat, Van Gogh, Cézanne, right? These are the people who are doing two things. They're moving forward. They're not just showing you the experience or the energy that they want you to feel. They're showing you what they want you to see and how they see it. So they're inviting you into their mind. So someone who's like really cool, like I mentioned, Seurat, right, is experimenting with pointillism. And something that's common of Impressionism, post-Impressionism is that when you stand away, you get a full picture. You can clearly identify what's being demonstrated in that piece. And as you get closer, there's strong brush strokes. There's decisions made that all of a sudden the picture just disappears in front of your eye and all you're seeing is the effort. So from here, we move into further modernism, which is Expressionism. And Expressionism is the child of post-Impressionism. Here we have people like Edvard Munch, right? The Scream is like probably one of the most famous paintings. And
Is it that guy with the...
Yes, the very famous Home Alone piece for those of you who aren't sure what we're talking about here. And in Expressionism, right, so we're talking about, it's in the title, expression. And so they carried forward this idea of demonstrating, I want you to see the world I see. And in Expressionism, it can get kind of dark, right, because we're talking about more emotions. And so with The Scream is a great example of sort of this terrifying piece. It's a very emotional piece.
Is it painted in Paris?
So Munch is from I don't want to lie and say Oslo, but he's from that area. And so actually, a shout out, if you go to their newly built museum, you can see it. It's an incredible exhibit they have set up. But yes, so we have this like more emotional movement. But post-impressionism also had another job, right? So we talk about, again, Seurat, Van Gogh, and we're talking about people who chose to work very systematically, sort of almost in shapes, and that's what brings about Cubism. So now we're still in the modern period, but the movements continue to shift over time, and somebody's inspiring somebody, whether they're inspiring them because they can't stand what they're doing, or in this case, right, they're inspired because now they're seeing where things can go forward. So another great person in Germany, we're talking about Kandinsky, right? So moving forward from Expressionism, Cubism, we move into Surrealism, which, as Ryan mentioned, right, we're talking about the greats, like Dali is the poster child for Surrealism.
Oh, I thought you meant Dolly the singer for some reason.
I wish, and I'm sure she'd be really good at anything she does, so I'm going to be surprised. But no, we're talking about Salvador Dali from Spain. And this is someone, right, who, it's an interesting, and this is why I bring up periods, so forgive me for the historical ramble. But when we're talking about someone like Dali, we're talking about a time where you're having new ideas of Marxist communism, Freud and his ideas of the ego, the id, right? And this conversation then comes into the art world, modernism, as surrealism. So we're experiencing works that, if you've ever had like the weirdest dream in the world, you don't know what the universe is trying to tell you. I feel like this is a great example of what surrealism can look like most oftenly.
Yeah, you lost me at surrealism and realism and all the isms. So can you dumb it down to me like I'm 5?
Yeah, so I guess what I'm saying is all of these movements fall within the modern period, which, again, these are terms you're going to hear a lot. People go, oh, it's from this period. It's from the Neolithic period, right? Whatever it may be from, they're generally talking about time, whereas movements have to do more with the thought process behind it, the energy that was moving them, or even the philosophies of the time then pushing forward and influencing how these artists are going to move forward. So, for example, Dada inspires Surrealism, and Dada came up at a time where a lot of people were suffering in poverty, and so artists decided to show the middle and upper class sort of their hypocrisy in not taking care of the people that matter, the values where it should be in human life, was their sort of belief. So this is a house that has a clear manifesto, they had a clear philosophy, and it's directly responding to their time period, which sounds kind of silly because I would argue most art is a response to the time you're living in. It's sort of unavoidable. And so moving forward through modernism, we come into abstract expression, which is people you think like Rothko, Pollock, right? And this is, again,
Pollock and his scattered art and the paintings.
yes, and if you are an art historian or someone who understands humanities, you may not be his biggest fan like me. But
Pollock was the guy I was thinking of earlier too, because he's also known for always recording himself.
Yes, there's a ton of photographs of him in his studio. And there's even they did like a bio doc after, but it was really very clear like how much he cared to document his process.
So would that be considered precedent, or is that how you pronounce the word?
Setting precedent, or
Yeah.
Or are you speaking of provenance?
Setting. I'm not even going to butcher the word.
Yeah, so when it comes to setting precedent, right, at the end of the day, in the art world, no one's creating anything new. Everything already exists. All ideas have already come into fruition. And the goal of the creative is to use the things that all exist and attempt something new, right? So that's also the build in this, right, moving forward. And someone like Pollock was doing something he pretty much was only doing at the time. So yes, him setting precedent, having those photographs really demonstrate to everyone, like, you know, no one can argue he was copying other people's work, I guess is a good way to put it. It's in a more stark way, it's an offer of insurance. In a more creative way, it's a great way to see an artist's growth.
And it shows, like, definitely originality, that you're buying original because there's so much evidence that he painted and Z.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's a whole nother conversation. But there are definitely people with a lot better eyes and training than mine to quickly pick up on exactly, for example, something I've heard come up, speaking of Pollock, is his follow through. So right when he threw paint in a lot of pieces, there was quite a bit of follow through. And so people have been able to pick up on fakes because of like looking at the splatter. It's kind of like a forensics experiment, if you will. And then that's what they'll do, not just for his pieces, most pieces, right? But he's a great example of seeing like, okay, we know his arm was X feet long, and we know that there's no way he could have created that with his personal dimension. Very specific, but it's a great way if you can.
By Pollock, no, thank you.
I concur. But hey, whatever floats your boat, and as long as it's moving you, right? It's not just about loving it; it's about feeling it, and that might not always be love. That might be frustration. As long as it's not making you feel nothing. Job.
Yeah, his work makes me feel nothing. It's fine.
We have to look at Rothko. I mean, simplest forms of art. Goes from millions, and whenever I'm in London or New York, they have them all over Washington, D.C. I get blown away by the certain trends that are happening in the art world, what does sell. Shed some light on that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my question is, in what way? Are you talking about sort of recognizing his influence forward, or specifically Rothko through time?
Him and other people like that style. That seems to be where the trend is going for the future. I could be wrong about this, but in your opinion, what are the current trends in the artistic view?
Everything, right? Just like fashion, any sense of creative world. When you're talking about the market, there will always be trends. They will come and go, and then you'll have geographic trends as well. New York is a very, we always say it's a very black and white city. Paris, very black and white city. So, it's hard to imagine seeing super colorful, bright pieces there. And not to say that they don't exist, but that's like sort of more their market. Versus when I can totally imagine that in London you're seeing sort of this revival of this, because that is, those of you who've been, that is sort of the spirit of the city. It's always just sort of lively, going, moving, and you're talking about the home of punk. That kind of energy makes totally the right sense for me. As far as following trends, this is where I'm so sorry if you don't get the answer you wanted, my friends. But I'm not a huge fan of them because they come and they go.
Literally, it's like, it's
Definition.
great today, it's not great tomorrow.
Sometimes trends are set by auction records. And so whatever you have, or several that sell a bunch of them, and people are going to pay attention for the next go around. Oftentimes, the auction market really determines where the trend is. And many artists who are successful, I shouldn't again generalize, but there are some who are successful just a circle of people walk in, or their parents. And so someone sees the work, they like it, they buy it, they're of some wealth. Hang it on the wall, right? So you have a party and people come over and you talk about it and they love it and you explain it to them. Not everything that's on the wall can be explained or understood, but it grabs people, and just based on your passion for it, as people become interested, and they say, well, if Margaret bought it and something or other, the fourth, bought enough of it, then it's something we should pay attention to. And this has happened time and time again, that artists become successful. The direct result of the circles that their parents are in, or they are.
Do you think that helped influence the prices?
Oh, most definitely. Because it's supply and demand, right? It starts selling, and it's just, people have to have it. I have to have it no matter what price.
Even if it's like at an auction, just because.
Auctions are a pretty interesting place. If you've never been at an auction,
I have not, no.
then I would beware. I've been to auctions, but most of the time when I've purchased things, I've done it online. I find that when you're at an auction and there's a piece you must have, that you can get caught up in the frenzy and the passion, and you just keep bidding. And if you're not educated enough of where a piece like that should sell, you'll end up paying more than what should have been paid for it. So in essence, what I'm saying also is that at many auctions, there are art dealers there. Some of them will partner up, 2, 3 of them at a time, and they'll say, okay, we'll bid together, or you buy it, and we'll all share in paying for it. And then when it's sold, they'll share in the profits. Spoiler, there is either somebody who's incredibly wealthy that's sitting right next to them who doesn't care what they pay for it. They just and at a certain point, the art dealer will drop out because they still have to sell this. Like, well, I'm not paying that for it because it really doesn't make sense to put it at this price. Nothing is ever sold at that price. You put it on your wall, you want to make a sale. For the person who's wealthy, it doesn't matter what they're paying for it. For the person who's not wealthy and uneducated, sometimes they'll just spend way too much for a piece and walk out of there happy that they got it, but they would have paid for it. And it starts to change the market for that artist or that specific multiple. And it's happened to me. I wanted to buy a piece by a great artist, John Sloan, a printmaker. Ashcan School, Snowstorm in the Village. And I didn't bid on it at auction. I just didn't pay attention to it. But I had my eye on one at a gallery on 57th Street. And so the piece sold that particular auction for $7,500. And prior to that, it was selling closer to $4,000 or $5,000. I called the dealer the next day immediately. I said, do you still have Snowstorm in the Village? She goes, oh, yes, of course. Are you still interested? I said, yeah. He's, by the way, did you see what it got at auction yesterday? And I said, yeah, hoping, of course, foolishly that he didn't take note. I ended up buying it because I figured I'm not going to get that piece again at that lower price because it's already been set here at this price, which it should have never sold for at auction.
When you go to auctions, I always tell people this, you need to have a set price in mind. It's easy to get stuck in the excitement, but if you cap it off and you need to stick with that cap, that's the only way you can really go to auctions and be successful at it. It's hard to walk away from a piece you really want when people keep bidding it up. But if you're looking to invest in this, you have to have a hard stop. And whatever that number is, once it hits it, you're done. You walk away. If you have to leave the room, leave the room. You're just going to drive yourself crazy. So that's how I operate when I go to auctions. Do you have any recommendations when buying at auctions?
I totally agree. The most important thing when you go to auction, if it's a multiple, it's much easier to track down what that piece is sold for in the past. Sotheby's and Christie's, they're very good. If you pick up the phone and call them, you say, oh, I want to know more about American artists, this particular, like Martin Lewis, one of my favorite artists, and this particular piece, can you tell me how much it's sold for within the last 10 years? And they will tell you on the phone, at least the last time I called them. So it's important you see what that piece is sold for. So it may have sold for $5,000 10 years ago. And then 2 years after that, it sold for $7,000. And then this year, it sold for $5,000 again. And one would say, well, why would that happen? Well, there are a lot of reasons for it, but one of the main reasons is because the condition of that piece is not the same. So it's more important than anything that when you buy at auction, whether you're present or not, if you are present, inspect the piece. They give you inspect it. If it needs to be out of the frame, they will do that for you. That way you'll know the quality of the piece that you're getting. When it comes to unique pieces, well, you can have the same size piece by the same artist, and they may be thousands of dollars apart because of the nuances or because one is really not recognized.
When buying on eBay and places like that, you can't actually see the item to inspect it. Do you recommend using eBay or avoid it?
I can't say that I do or don't recommend it. It's all about your buying style, but I will say, in eBay, the most important factor is that seller review. You know what, if they've been stiffing people left and right, you have like 1 star, you're not buying from that person. If you're buying art on eBay or any of the platforms, I would say always ask the seller to send more pictures if you're not satisfied with what's on there. Send more info if you're not satisfied with what you're reading. Again, if it's a $100 piece, they're going to say, I'm not doing that for $100. I mean, you buy it or don't. But it's $3,000 or $4,000. You should really know more about the piece, or $20,000. And it's not that these pieces do not sell on eBay. They do. but one should always be well informed about the artist. Because I've bought photographs online. One thing that I do find I've really had to be more diligent about looking at is because there are so many different types of photographic medium.
What does art provenance mean, and how do you get this information?
Art provenance is really important, more so when you're dealing with a piece of value. And that is, it always goes back to the source. If you can trace the work of art back to the source, and the source being the artist, that's a great thing. Oftentimes, it's not the case. What will show you the provenance on a work of art? Most times, there are tags that are on the back of the piece or on the back of the frame. Some pieces on canvas will have labels on them of some sort, some kind of stamps, sometimes handwritten notations. And every time that piece changes hands, there should be a record of it. Part of it may be the bill of sale. So the importance of it is when you're dealing with a work of art that you're talking about, I don't know, millions of dollars, you want to authenticate that this is not a fraud. And the art provenance is the one way to do it. However, we've seen that there are artists who have created pieces that nobody's ever seen, and somehow, somewhere in some country, it's been in someone's attic. Nothing behind it, so you take it to the experts. And they're the ones who will determine based on putting it under x-ray machines or scraping away a little bit of paint to see if that's the type of hand that the artist used to create it. So the provenance itself is really just a record keeping of that piece of work since it's been created.
As the listeners know, a few months back, I bought a Salvador Dali piece on eBay, and it was a complete mislabel. It was being sold as a Picasso, and I took the gamble with it. So on the back of the picture, it was a Salvador Dali that I got. They were art stamps from 5 different galleries throughout Spain and Paris. So you're saying that is a common thing. So would that be considered the provenance?
Yes, if it's been stamped along its journey for where it's gone. I don't want to make you nervous, but I'd have to tell you that even stamps or labels can be counterfeited as well. And that has happened time and time again, that someone will create a provenance for a piece that has never made any kind of a journey, and they've created the piece themselves, and they can make authenticating look like labels on the piece, and it's really not. So what's the recommendation there? Then the recommendation is take it to the experts, someone who knows Picasso or whatever you've purchased, or Dali well, and they'll be the ultimate word on it.
And how much does it cost to go to an expert on average?
That I don't know. Many sources, a lot of times you can go to an auction house, for instance, Sotheby's, and immediately someone there will, if they give you a day, they'll tell you, oh yeah, they'll know right off the bat if it's fake or not. If it's not a fake, they definitely want to get their hands on it to sell it.
That was my case when I wanted to bring in the Dali for authentication. The auction house said they were willing to do it for free, but I had to let them sell it. They weren't going to do it unless I let them sell it when I showed it to them. So I get that because they have to make money, and that's how they offer it. But how would you go about it if you don't want to sell it?
And you'd go to a gallery of reputation who does sell this work. And then how do you know that the gallery is reputable? Of course. Part of it is the amount of time that they've been in business. If they've been in business for 30, 40 years, they've been doing something right. And they're not out there, they're cheating people. Although that's also happened, right? But you get a consensus, so you take it to one gallery and then go to another one. Because it's not just one gallery selling the work. And you probably, if it's a questionable piece, you probably will have to do it that way. But I'm surprised that which auction house that was, that any auction house would say, well, we'll authenticate it, but we need to sell it. That doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I'm not going to give out their name because they're pretty big in the DC area, but because I don't want to make anyone look bad. That might just be the way they do things. Well, moving on, this is a very contentious field going into it, artificial intelligence. How do you feel about artificial intelligence being used in art? And do you think art that was created with AI has any value?
I would say that yes. And it depends on, what determines the value of art or anything. If someone's willing to buy it, it's what the market will bear. there are so many different ways that you can use AI. For instance, I was just taught by someone the other day in Photoshop. They've been dying to get me to Photoshop my photographs. The only thing I do in Photoshop is adjust the contrast, the brightness, and so on. Nothing else, which is what I would do in the darkroom. Because I shoot film. And I develop and shoot film almost every day. So what they did was they showed me my photograph. Oh, you could have had a boat in here, and they typed it up, and it was pretty fun to do. You can type up boat, and it will place a boat where you want it in your photograph, just like that. That's artificial intelligence. So if you're the type of artist that's what you want to do to sell your work, and it's the look that you want, then bravo, go for it. And if there are people willing to buy it, I mean, I personally don't consider anything wrong with it. You're not selling out. If it's your vision and what you want to do, that's what art is. In terms of the value, whether or not it will hold value in the future or now, the public will determine that.
I think the world always moves with technologies, right? And at some point, for example, like printmaking, I'm sure there are plenty of people contesting, but that's not the original, right? And so this is always going to be a conversation as new technology arises. I think it really takes the consideration of the artist to be more transparent. I think that's their best bet, for them to explain their use of it and how it is a use to create, and that's their craft, versus what a lot of people know about AI, right? That it's constantly borrowing and taking. And I think that's the fear of most people, right? Are you going to put someone's piece of art in smack in the middle of yours and claim that it was your original idea, versus what every good artist does, which is that they study their craft and they study other art and they decide one day, okay, this is the vision that's appealing forward. So I think it's definitely how you put it forward. The caveat I will put there is, if you look at magazines and artist journals, you'll find in the submission section a lot of these well-known distributors, journals, they'll put no AI art. So that's something just to consider for the artists that are out there. But as an art collector, again, you just have to decide, who are you? Am I the aesthete? Do I just love it? Am I a collector? Am I an investor? And if I'm an investor, do I see the future of this, right? That's really the question at the end of the day. But I would consider AI art for sure, depending on the craftsman.
How can people protect themselves from buying fake art? Is there a way to protect yourself?
Well, to protect yourself from buying fake art, again, you really do have to go to the experts, and or you really do have to educate yourself on the art to know what it is that this artist does. Know that it's the same signature, for instance, and you brought up something being signed in pencil or in pen when an artist doesn't normally do it one way or the other. Look for these things. Once you buy it, again, you're your own best gauge. If something smells funny, then go with it and research it. Take it to a gallery that sells the work, or photograph it and send it to a gallery, and they can usually from a photograph tell you if it's any good. The other thing would be get a good magnifying glass and look at the art, because I've had people come in here with different works of art that they would swear was original. I get my magnifying glass and I show them the dot matrix from a print on there and say, well, this is how you can tell. And they're so upset because they spent a couple of $1,000 on something that's worth tens of dollars.
And that's quite common with a lot of forms of art, because especially with the dot matrix, that's printing in essence. And they tell you it's real and it's not. But that's an easy one to notice right away.
Yes, it's offset print.
Yes. So with pencils and graphites and pens, I also look for indentation into the paper. Because if you're using, I guess for paint, not so much because you're layering on top of paint, but anything drawn, there should be indentions. Nobody draws so softly, so smooth. There's no indentions on the paper. So I can usually figure that one out myself quite fast. Is there any other recommendations someone could do to spot?
To spot whether it's a fake or not? No, outside of taking it to the experts. That's pretty much it. Knowing that if you're buying it online, you're kind of always taking a chance. Again, look at the rating for that person.
And outside of galleries, where is a safe place to buy original art?
Auction market. Very safe place. And also, a tip to those out there, you'll generally get a work of art at a much lesser price at an auction market. Because if you think about it, the galleries, we all go out, well, used to go out to the auction market to buy a work of art. And if it's not for ourselves, then we're going to put it up for sale. So if it costs whatever, $400, let's say at a low price, we'll sell it for anywhere between $600 and $800. And the higher you go up, and it's what the market will bear, what that piece is sold for before. And so there you have your pricing on what it is that you're purchasing and selling at your gallery.
As with investing in stocks and mutual funds, and we're not going to go into detail about stocks and mutual funds. That's not what we're talking about here. But you have speculative investments and you have blue chip investments. What art forms would fall into those categories? Can art be labeled blue chip and speculative?
Oh, yeah, it is. And let's take just one of the more popular artists out there, Andy Warhol, and works sell for tons of money. And there are investment companies that will buy that piece, and you give them some money with some other people to buy it, and they'll hold it and they'll decide to sell it, or you make your money back on it. I don't know enough about this to tell you what your return is going to be, but just like any investment, is always a gamble. We all know this. Buy IBM today at whatever it's selling at 600, and tomorrow it can be 550, and you've lost a ton of money on that, whatever that is. Same thing with any artwork. If the trend for that particular artist goes by the wayside, then you have to sit on that till it comes back up. I've answered that.
So recently, comic books and Pokemon cards and that exploded when the pandemic happened. And then a year later, they crashed. And they're still slowly dropping. They're not as bad, so they may be finding the bottom now. As my listeners know, I love comics. I have an obsession.
We have to talk about that.
Yes. And I could talk about that for hours with the comic books. But that may or may not return to those levels because the pandemic, people had extra money and they pushed these prices up higher than they've ever been. Was that happening here in the art world as well?
It'll happen pretty much in every area, but it depends on the artists that we're speaking of. And I can't give you any specific names, but, unfortunately, some artists sell well, and then it was a passing fad, and then they kind of disappear into obscurity, either because they've died and no one's there to pick it up for them and continue to get that work moving, or it's just because it was a certain look of the time and everybody was hot for it. And then, and I'm not going to mention any artists, there are a bunch of them that I know of. And today, they're all over eBay selling for less than half the price that someone would have. A good deals to be had for that person today who likes the work and wants to buy. Go for it. It doesn't make it any less. It's just a matter of your passion for the work, what it is that you want to see on your wall.
I see a resurgence, especially in the LGBTQ community. A lot of artwork from the 70s, which was considered underground. Now, I love underground art, especially Robert Crumb and everyone else. But there's a lot of famous gay artists back then, and they are having a big boom period right now. Is that a trend you think can keep going forward, or do you think that's going to fizzle out?
It really should keep moving forward because art shouldn't be labeled based on what your gender is or what it is life personally. And it's terrible to label it so many different ways. But yes, I happen to think that it will continue to grow because the community itself is calling for it and the community itself will support it.
And companies like Masterworks offer investors a chance to invest in a piece of art. You buy fractional shares of that piece of art. Using your money, they decide when to buy and sell. So it's, in essence, you're investing in a hedge fund. Is this a good way to enter the art market?
Not a good way to enter into the art market, because when you talk about entering the art market, there, as Natalia said earlier, there are a few different ways of what that art market means to you and what that work of art means. I find that it's unfortunate that a work of art can be purchased. Let's say Vermeer, Johann Vermeer, beautiful work, right? A group of people will get together and that piece of work, who knows where it's going to be, certainly not in a basement, those moisture in there, but in a vault, in a safe deposit box where nobody gets to enjoy this work of art. We're going off topic here, but in terms of investing in it, again, it's always a gamble because you have to trust the person you're investing with. What's their track record? This is something that's incredibly new. Bitcoin and all these other currencies are all new. So you have to really trust the person who's investing your money that they're going to make the right decisions. Is it a good way to get into the art market? I would just say no, flat out. Obviously, there are people making money this way. For me, it's still too new to put your dollar on any particular person.
So a thing in art, especially in comic books, is buying the whole collection. So if someone passes away, they have lots of art in their house. In comics, it is well known the value can go up more if you own the whole collection of a private investor who's well known in that industry. Does that exist for paintings in the art world as well?
If you can get it, sure, it does. But I guess the only real significance of buying a whole collection, I mean, that's tough to buy every single thing, would be to exhibit it in different places to show a retrospective. I used to think that way. And there's an artist that I would buy every single piece that would come out by him. And not every piece is a winner. And so I decided, why buy, at least because I do invest in some of the artists that I carry here on a much smaller scale, right? Why should I buy every single piece? One, because I don't like every single one of them. Two, not all of them go up in price. Some of them are still $200, and I bought them 20, 25 years ago, where others are $3,000 or $4,000. My strategy was, well, instead of buying every single piece, the ones that I do like, 3 or 4 of them. And those are the ones that they go up in value, and that's even better. So a collection is a really big deal when you're talking about institutions that a museum would acquire. In terms of an individual, like what do you do with an entire collection?
And I'd just like to clarify, right? There's a difference between a collection and, let's say, a suite or a triptych. Because if you see a triptych, right, these are 3 panels, so to speak, of paintings normally. And you're going to want to buy all 3. One, do not split them up. That's not how the artist wanted you to experience it. But on an investment level, of course, it's worth way more to own an entire suite than to just own one of the suite. So keeping things together as the artist intended, it is appropriate. You don't have to buy the whole collection, but if within that collection you see a suite of 4 or a triptych, buy them.
Do they label it from the estate of XYZ person?
Depends on whether there is a real estate representative. That, well, it has to be a name artist if you have an estate behind you. So yes, in that case, it would be labeled of, not on the artwork, but in essence, in whatever paperwork.
Well, there's an interest. So Thomas Jefferson had a lot of art, and I know this goes way back in our history. Being able to buy stuff that says was owned by Thomas Jefferson or it came from Thomas Jefferson's library, I think that adds a considerable amount of value to that item versus it being on its own.
I mean, you're talking about one of our forefathers, right? And you're touching history at that point. Thomas Jefferson, Harriet Tubman. I'd give anything to read the Bible that she used to read all the time. Who knows where it is and what the value of it is at this point, but that will always have an effect. Jackie Kennedy Onassis passed away, and her estate went up for sale. Everything that was in family pictures, some of the most insignificant things that she owned went to auction, and they sold for a pretty penny. So that contact, I think, for the individual is just owning a piece of that person that either they admire or they would just, well, yeah, that would be the word, admire.
And when you buy art, especially valuable art, you need to insure it. Who do you recommend for insurance?
I think that the biggest name that everyone knows out there is Chubb, and they're pretty thorough in terms of insuring art. There's one that I insured with many, many years ago, and since I now live in Jersey, they're not in Jersey, but it's called the Fireman's Fund. I find that they're pretty thorough in terms of how they cover artwork. One thing I would recommend, so of those 2 names again are Chubb. I'm sorry, I'm giving a plug to these companies.
No, we want to know what the names of the companies to contact.
I do insure with Allstate. And I had a flood at home and it was in the basement, and thankfully nothing of any real value was damaged, but what was damaged, Allstate came in, assessed, and they did pay it out. Weary of the insurance policies you take out, because Allstate is funny. It's this company I thought I'd never insure with again, because many, many years ago when I got home, there was a curtain in my daughter's bedroom that was charred from the radiator catching fire. Fortunately, nothing happened. The next day, the phone call was to my insurance company. What if I would have had a fire here? And what they told me, well, you would get paid what you paid for the work of art. I said, well, it's worth more today. They said, well, yeah, but that's not the insurance policy that you took out. And I'm saying this because these are things that you always have to question insurance agencies, not only the agency, but also redefine print. And so the long and the short of it is, I said, well, how much would it cost? They tell me what you want is replacement cost, and that's what it's worth today. So how much more would it have been to insure my artwork replacement cost? They said, maybe another $100 a year. And I said, thank you. Tomorrow I think I'm canceling my policy. And I did. And that's when I went with the fireman's fund. I've never had any real incidents, thank goodness. But one should also know that insuring your home, one thing, insuring your art is another thing. So you should get a rider. And artwork, believe it or not, is really inexpensive to insure. Not like jewelry. Jewelry is very expensive to insure, but not artwork. Not at this point anyway. So make sure you get a separate rider and review it once a year. They will send you a notice, and you will go ahead and update any particular prices on the artwork. So the next question you'll ask is, well, how do you know what it's worth the next year? And either you contact the artist if you're in touch with them, or you look it up online if the prices are there, or you contact the galleries. There are artists who have passed away and there's no real way. Then you go to the auction market and see what it's selling for, and you track the galleries to see what they're selling it for. Ultimately, it's the insurance company that's out, so those prices have to drive at the end.
And how should you store your art after buying it, just to preserve it and make it last longer? What's the best way?
Your wall, so you can enjoy what you've purchased. But if for some reason, see, that the beauty of being an art collector is just buying what you like, whether or not it fits on your wall or it fits anywhere, because you can always rotate it. So if you're rotating, then there's your question, like, where am I going to put this thing? Don't put it in the basement. Basements tend to be, in a lot of cases, pretty humid. I would say put it in a closet. Don't put it on the floor, because you can have a flood in the apartment. And water is one of the best things we have in life, very essential. But when it comes to destroying things, water does not think twice. Because although your art may be sitting on the floor, that wood that is framed in will start soaking up that water and will continue to go in it. So don't put your art on the floor. Wrap it in a foam, depending on the frame also, because gold leaf frames are easy to ruin if you put plastic on it. Moisture gets in there. And put it in paper, put it in foam, wrap it in cardboard, and store it that way above the floor if you have a nice closet big enough to do it. Have a storage facility that you know they haven't been broken into, put it there. Make sure it's climate control. And again, keep it at least a foot off the floor.
I have a storage unit that I use for a lot of my art. It's climate controlled, and I did not want the bottom level. I chose the second level because I'm always worried if it does flood, there's no protecting that. So at least being on the second level, 10 feet up, unless it's on monsoon, I'm pretty well protected in that essence.
I'm sorry to feed your paranoia, but a lot of these places have sprinkler systems. So just make sure, right, that it's completely covered, not just up off the floor, but you really do have to consider all of it when you're storing your works.
I think I need to go back to my storage system and check that out.
Take a look, and if that's the case, then you know you have to wrap everything in plastic. The problem with wrapping in plastic is you cut off the air circulation. So then you get those silicone thingies, and you throw it in the package.
I do have a lot of art in my office, but I keep it dark because I don't want the lights ruining it, and I do have a few special lights. What's your opinion on that? Because if you're hanging it in your house or in an art gallery, this has a lot of lighting. And so lighting can be an enemy of art.
Real enemy of art is ultraviolet light. So that's fluorescent bulbs. Not too long ago, I went to a very good lawyer, customer, friend's home, not home, his office downtown. And he had a piece on the wall that I recognized because I sold that artist. I didn't tell him, I didn't have the heart to, but he was so happy showing me his collection. But that particular piece, lost almost all its color. And I'm not so sure he noticed. The reason you won't is because it happens so gradually that you really can't tell that it's losing color and losing color. So to that end, make sure the right glass is on it. We went over that, the UV glass. And or I have a couple of customers who have had a company come in to coat all their windows with a film. Cuts off the UV light coming into the apartment. What happens there, or house? What happens there is that UV light will ruin, sunlight will ruin everything. It won't only ruin your art, it'll ruin your furniture, it'll ruin your floors. So you coat that, or you simply pull the shade down. Now, you say you keep it dark in there. The type of light that ruins art is UV. So if you have incandescent lighting, it's not going to ruin artwork.
I have 2 big windows, but I'm just paranoid, so I keep the blinds down all the time.
Better to be paranoid.
Yeah, so it stays dark in there, and some of these things I can't replace. Stan Lee signed so much of my stuff, and so when you go in there's no replacing that. And I don't care if you can buy it on eBay. I met him, and you can't replace the story that goes with these items, so I try to keep it relatively dark as I can, and when people want to see it, I'll slowly raise the lights up.
I think you got the right idea, and you'll have it fresh and pristine for many, many years to come.
But I would like to thank Alfred and his daughter Natalia for speaking with us today. What is the best way for people to reach out to you and learn more about Gallery 71?
Well, we're located in the heart of New York City, 71st Street and Lexington Avenue. 974 is the store number. Our phone number is 212-744-7779. Our Instagram is Gallery71NYC, and we're on Facebook as Gallery.
Thank you for listening.
If you enjoyed this episode, hit subscribe, like, and leave us a review.
Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter.
We will see you next time at Investors Coffee Shop.